Okay. As we seem to agree, or as we have agreed today, digital interaction is an integrated part of everyday life and everyday communication at work, in leisure, and in education. And these two mediagrams here tells us something about this. First, we have the blue mediagram. It's the mediagram of Inyas. He's a Lithuanian labor migrant in Norway working at a farm. And we can see in the circle surrounding him his interlocutors at work. So we might think of farm work as being manual work, including animals, machines, etc. But as we can see, digital interaction is also integrated into Ina's everyday farm work life. We see that all the lines going from Inyas to his interlocutors are red, which means that he always interacts in Norwegian. It's both dotted and full lines here. It means that he both interacts in writing and in spoken interaction using phone calls, Google Drive, SMS messages, and email. Inyas is also a father, and he also interacts digitally with the teachers of his children. The second mediagram on the slide illustrates this. This is the mediagram of Greta, who interacts with the teacher of a child using various tools. You probably can identify Teams here. There are 2 apps dedicated to school-home interaction, phone calls and SMS messages. And as you can see, all interaction with school and kindergarten is in Norwegian only, whereas with friends and family, it's much more multilingual. So this talk is about the study of such multilingual, multimodal, and multi-channel interaction in the online-offline nexus, and with a focus on the workplace and education. And the talk then is about how we can use mediagrams to learn about this. Mediagrams were developed by Thyness and Androutsopoulos and me in an earlier project on multilingual family practices, looking at the family's linguistic repertoires. And you can read more about that project in our recently published book, Multilingual Families in a Digital Age. And I will start with some background for the mediagram, but today I will talk about how a mediagram can be applied in 2 different domains, the workplace and in education. So I will start with some background for the research and the research methodology before I describe the mediagram more in detail and discuss their theoretical grounding. Then I look at how mediagrams enhance collaborative data collection through presenting 2 cases where the participants found their own ways of using the mediagrams to represent themselves. And not only their interaction, but also who they were as migrants. Turning to the analysis of mediagrams, I first discussed the workplace study, focusing on how mediagrams were used to analyze interaction in a hotel, looking particularly at cleaning work. And second, I compared these with some results from the school-home interaction study, which eventually led to an intervention using mediagrams in the classroom. Mediagram methodology departs from an interest in the connections between mobility, multilingualism, and mediated communication. In the sociolinguistics of mobility, languages are studied as mobile resources. As people move, they acquire new resources, and the resources that they dispose of change status. Digital tools are important in migration in several ways. They are, for instance, used to stay in touch transnationally with family, friends, and diasporic communities. They are used as a space where new acquaintances can be made, for instance, to integrate into social network in a new country of residence. And as new linguistic resources are acquired and used, migrants can transform the spaces in which they find themselves in. And 2 of the spaces that migrants move in and where they use linguistic resources and digital tools are work and education. And these 2 domains are considered as crucial for both inclusion and language learning. Starting with the workplace. At work, workers use language to communicate, but also to negotiate roles and positions, to exercise agency and resistance. And for a second language user, this can be particularly challenging, as communication and language competence make up mechanisms for accessing and acquiring power in the workplace. This is closely related to inclusion in the workplace, which, referring to Felder's definition, includes social freedom related to both societal and communal forms of recognition, whereby individuals become esteemed members of society, in this case, esteemed members of staff. And this means that they are valued both for the contributions that they make and for the persons that they are. Obviously, interaction is important for the process of inclusion or exclusion, and so is language. And while many studies focus on multilingual interaction in workplaces, not that many focus on digital interaction in these workplaces, with notable exception by Caroline and Agnieszka, of course, for instance. However, digital tools are integrated into everyday communication at work, both for relational and transactional purposes, and in all kinds of workplaces, not just the kind of workplaces where we find ourselves in. A second important domain for inclusion is education. And research here shows that although diversity as resource perspective is solicited, at least so in many places and in Norway too, the problem orientation often characterizes practice. There are clear political expectations to the school of being an arena for inclusion of both pupils and parents. And in this space, again following Felder's discussion, inclusion is based on the one hand, instrumental rationality, and thereby social inclusion into education, into the educational system, and on the other, on emotion-based relationships, where the teacher-pupil and teacher-parent interaction is crucial. And again, digital tools are increasingly used for the school's interaction with the homes and for the parents' interaction with the teachers. This is why in the DigiMulti project, a 4-year project that runs from 2020 to 2024, so this is still work in progress, we wanted to investigate how digital interaction relates to practices of inclusion and exclusion, social equality and inequality in these two domains, the school-home interaction and interaction in the workplace. So in one sub-project, Hilde Thyness, a PhD fellow, studies digitally mediated interaction between teachers and parents with Norwegian as a second language, interviewing both teachers and parents. In the other, I investigate Lithuanian labor migrants' digitally mediated interaction in multilingual workplaces with superiors, with colleagues, with clients. And here also both employers and employees are interviewed, are participants in the project. The research questions are thus as follows. First, how do language practices and digital interaction at work and in the dialogue between parents and teachers affect work migrants' experiences of inclusion and exclusion? And second, we look for patterns across the cases to ask in what ways digital interaction is used as a channel for practices of inclusion and or exclusion. And for this purpose, we use Mediagrams. Mediagram methodology is based on repertoire theory. Departing from the linguistic repertoire as originally defined by Gumpers with reference to the shared language resources of the community, Busch and others have theorized it in terms of an individual's set of mobile resources connected with life trajectories, with language experiences, and with shifting social environments in which a person finds him or herself. Bringing in the multimodal dimension of communication, Kusters and colleagues prefer to talk about semiotic repertoires. And from a media anthropological perspective, Maggiano and Miller consider also the various digital tools that we have at our disposal as an environment of affordances. They coined the notion of polymedia to study the repertoire of media to choose from when communicating. And polymedia theory postulates that the interlocutors make their media choice depending on what kinds of emotions and relationships that they want to negotiate and express. Following this, Tag and Lyons talk about polymedia repertoires and polymedia nest in terms of how a digital platform is a resource into which other resources are embedded, as we heard earlier today too. Yeah. Androutsopoulos and I argue that when we communicate digitally, we draw on a mediational repertoire as linguistic and media resources are mobilized together, including pictorial and genre resources. A mediational repertoire is a socially and individually structured configuration of semiotic and technological resources that are deployed for mediated communication. So we are interested in how these resources are brought into use in social practice. And to be able to seize this complexity, we want to work with visualizations. So a visualization of the multilingual repertoire. And before describing the Mediagram methodology, I would therefore like to say a few words about visual tools, the use of visual tools, and why they are useful for doing research on and in the online-offline nexus. In an overview of research using visual tools, Pitcairn-Hota and Pietikainen use the metaphors of looking at, seeing, and designing language. The first point, looking at language, involves using visual material to look at something together with a participant. Mediagrams provide a way of looking at language together to co-construct the meaning of the visual object in the researcher's dialogue with the producer. Seeing language refers to becoming aware of something through observation, reflection, and interpretations. And drawings are typically used in this sense, and we use the media map as a drawing that precedes the mediagram in this methodology. Another widely used tool is the language portrait, developed by Busch and used for the study of linguistic repertoires. And in the project with Yannis, we used this to study the multilingual family linguistic repertoire, but in the current project, it is not used. Designing language emphasizes the collaborative aspect, typically involving a material artifact created with both researcher and participants as active contributors. The mediagram can be considered such an artifact, but obviously the instructions regarding how to make it, regarding the use of colors and elements to include, limit the participants' influence on the final product, even though they may figure out their own ways of using these, as we will see in a minute. I would like to mention also two examples that illustrate how visuals can be used to study digital interaction. In the What's in the App project, Kedra studied transnational families' digitally mediated interaction, and she used an interactive collage in the interviews. So she provided symbols on small pieces of paper that the participants used to make a collage, and she saw that the participants used them in their own ways, not necessarily how she had foreseen them to be used. Prieto Blanco also used a circle of reference with pieces of paper with different colors on as a visualization to collect data on families' photo sharing practices. When participants design language in these ways, they have the opportunity both to represent their practices in ways that they shape themselves and to challenge the researcher's perspective through imposing their own as co-producer and co-creators of knowledge. Visualization tools therefore enhance user-centered research, which, as Bolander and Locher and also Tagenlyons argue here, is an important approach in the study of interaction in the online-offline nexus. And mediagrams respond to this as they are visualizations of one individual's mediational repertoire. Mediagrams are part of a qualitative method making use of interviews and the collection of interactional data. So mediagrams are both used to collect data and they make up data in themselves. The data collection process starts with a drawing of a media map. As you can see here, this is a media map of Inyas that we met earlier. I don't know if you can see it very clearly, but there is some Norwegian and some Lithuanian here. Two different colors. Some is written by Inyas, some is written by me. And this drawing is turned into a mediagram after the interview. And then the mediagram is brought to the next interview with the participant. So I made a a mediagram of my own interaction in Lithuanian to bring to these interviews, because I'm not a speaker of Lithuanian myself, so I took an intensive course on beforehand to have some knowledge and to bring in the Lithuanian language also in the data collection. So maybe the use of Lithuanian here is more related to the mediagram that I brought to the interview than what the participant wanted to use. As you cannot see that, but if you understood Norwegian, you can see that it's mainly in Norwegian what he wrote in the media map. Yeah. And then this drawing goes to the computer and becomes the mediagram, as you can see here. We have Ines communicating with a farm owner only in writing SMS messages and Google Drive, and this is different from the retired farm owner, the father of the current farm owner, where all interaction was spoken using phone calls. He also works for a sheep farmer and a grass farmer. He communicates with craftsmen, with a supplier, with a veterinarian, and all the formal aspects of his employment are regulated by the farm services, and there he uses email. The mediagram research process can thus be summarized as follows. In step 1, there is the collaborative map drawing. In step 2, the participants select data to share with the research, like this screenshot, for instance. And in step 3 and 4, all of this is turned into a mediagram. And then in step 5, there is a mediagram-based interview where the mediagram is brought back to the participant for discussion. And usually it will grow at each interview, because the participant will discover things that were not there, or maybe things that have changed since the last interview. And finally, in step 6, the mediagrams can be used for analysis, for instance, to compare individuals or to look at other things, and we will have a look at that in a minute. And I would like to say something about how mediagrams work as a collaborative tool in data collection. The participant agency becomes evident when we look at the ways in which some participants use the mediagram in their own ways. Greta here, she has not just indicated interlocutors in her current work, she has used the mediagram to present her entire work trajectory, work and language learning trajectory in Norway. It starts on top with private cleaning in English only, and SMS messaging. She came to Norway to join her husband, who had lived there for some years, and started cleaning in a private home using English. And then she started working at the farm. She still used English, but some Norwegian. And then she started cleaning in a public place, using more and more Norwegian and less English. And from the lab cleaning, which actually was a totally digital employment, where she didn't meet her employers until 2 years after she had worked for them, she only uses Norwegian, and she learned this herself. She attended some classes, but she experienced being used as an assistant teacher, so she quit and learned it on her own. At the school where she was cleaning, she put in the Facebook, because Facebook was an important way to connect with her colleagues, and also this connection with the colleagues was important in her Norwegian language learning, Greta says. Then she started cleaning in a company where she was not treated well, and she ended up on sick leave and left the company. But during her work at that company, she had created relations with the clients using SMS messages and phone calls to communicate directly with them, not through the company that she was working for. So when they understood what was going on, they said, well, you can come and clean with us, and you can make your own company, and we will be your clients in that new company. So Greta used the mediagram to tell this story about herself as a fighter, and both who learned Norwegian on her own and who created her own company with support from her Norwegian network. So she represents herself in terms of what has been called an entrepreneurial self and a self-made speaker. These are not necessarily used in a very positive connotation when talking about this course, but for her, this was, she took some kind of pride in carrying out these roles, and used the mediagram to tell this story. Another participant, also a cleaner, Laura brought in a new dimension to the mediagram that she figured out on her own. When drawing the media map, she did not use the colors to indicate languages as she was asked to do. She instead used the color yellow to indicate what kind of interaction she engaged in every day and what kind of tools she used every day in her daily interactions. And second, she chose to include family, relatives, and what she called worldwide friends in her mediagram. And here you see a group of interlocutors that she calls babushkos. These are old ladies who have traveled the world, and she used to clean for them, but now she only works, she helps them on a voluntary basis. And this drawing, now turned into a mediagram, was used to emphasize Laura's story about herself as leading a transnational, multilingual life, being initially a tourist in Norway and accidentally getting a job as a cleaner there and choosing to stay because of the nature and the possibilities to do sports in the country. She underlined the multilingual nature of her daily interactions, both at work, she worked in a hotel, and in her digital transnational communication. And she framed this as a way to meet the world in Norway instead of traveling. Both Laura and Greta were participants in the workplace study, together with 11 other participants. And here you see the different jobs that they had. In addition to the 10 labor migrants holding different jobs, 3 Norwegian employers were also recruited to the study to embrace their perspectives too on digital language practices and inclusion at work. And the participants were recruited through snowball sampling, both from my own network and from a Facebook page for Lithuanian migrants in inland Norway. To analyze the practices, we'll also bring on in the concept of affordances, which in an ecological perspective on language learning are considered as action potential of the social environment. And from a communication theory perspective, Hutchby applied affordances to reconcile the constructivist and realist approaches to technology, to consider both the social shaping of technology and technological shaping of social action. In both approaches, the notion of affordances balances opportunities for and constraints on communicative action. And an important aspect is the user's or learner's awareness of the affordances, their perceptions of the affordances in the technological and social environment. In a study of second language learning in a workplace in Finland, Strömmer concluded that cleaning was a dead-end job because of the lack of affordances in the work environment to engage in meaningful interaction. The organization of the work through outsourcing to a cleaning company made the cleaner an outsider to the workplace, and he often worked alone, only engaging in very scarce communicative practices at some instances during his workday. So one of the questions asked in the workplace study is what this looks like from a digital interaction perspective. And I will start this analysis with a discussion of cleaning work and affordances of digitally mediated interaction. There are several cleaners among the participants in the project. We already met 2 of them, Greta and Laura, and a third one, Ruta, works in a hotel too. She has a degree in Russian philology and went to Norway to join her husband, who had migrated earlier, and she immediately started working as a cleaner in a hotel, and she's still there. She has not attended Norwegian classes, and just like the participant in Strömmer's article, she says that she struggles with the language, and this is related to the fact that she usually works alone. Because I don't work with Norwegians only alone, she says. And here you see her mediagram. There is a limited set of interlocutors when she works, and this may signal that her opportunities for engaging in interaction with the colleagues is limited. And if we look at the interactional data that she shared, this is also quite limited. She gets instructions from the receptionist and she answers okay. If we compare Ruta's mediagram with some of her colleagues' mediagrams, we have the janitor here. he calls himself a boiled potato, and I thought that was a good label, because a potato in Norwegian, that's a person who can be used for any task at the workplace. And when reading the interactional data that he provided, you can see that he's running around the hotel and going all kinds of places all the time, so that he feels like a boiled potato. I can really understand that, so I brought in that image here. He has a little bit more of interlocutors that he engages with at work. He also works as a masseur after work, because he's a physiotherapist and he wants to work as that when he gets the B2 level of Norwegian. So he engages with a hotel owner, the hotel manager, with colleagues, with mates and clients from his masseur work, using Norwegian, English and Lithuanian. If we now move on to the receptionist, we see that there are even more interlocutors here: guests, seasonal workers, hotel manager, permanent employees, the sous chef, and the union. She's also in the union, in the work union. So she's doing work there too. And she came to Norway as an adolescent and started working in this hotel where she was still at the time of the data collection. And now moving to the hotel manager, we see that there is a big difference related to the hierarchy at work in terms of how many interlocutors the different people there engage with. So it may seem, like in Sturmer's study, that cleaning is more of a dead-end job for language learning. However, the affordances of digital tools make a difference for this cleaner at this hotel, and we will now look at some examples of that. This is an example from Plan Day, a workplace app that this workplace used to communicate the more formal aspects of work communication, like timekeeping and work hours. And there are not only differences in the interlocutors, channels, and languages that workers engage with, but they also perceive inclusion and language learning affordances at work differently, whether they are technological or social environment affordances. For this app, the workers can choose their own interface language, and the hotel manager said this is great because it can be more inclusive, so people can use their own language when they use the app. Whereas the participants, Ruta and the janitor and the receptionist, they said, of course we use it in Norwegian. We want to increase our exposure to Norwegian language as much as possible. So this is an example of a digital channel used for work purposes, created for work purposes, but there is also the social media interaction. Platforms used for communication among the staff outside work hours. And the study shows that also social media play an important role when it comes to inclusion. We remember the interaction between the receptionist and Ruta from earlier, where the receptionist gave orders and the cleaner answered okay. But here the receptionist talks about a change that took place during COVID. I feel that the communication between me and Ruta has changed, at least now that Corona came. I started to knit like crazy, so we started sending photos to each other. We started skiing and sent pictures to each other. And you see an example of the interactional data here, where roles have changed a little bit. Here Ruta is the expert and the receptionist is learning from her. Here is another example of how social media and the work context can be important for inclusion and language learning. This is an example from a different participant now working in social care, and it dates back, well, you cannot see it, but it's from 2011, from when this participant was new in Norway. She had just started taking Norwegian classes. She had started working in a restaurant where she could speak English at work, and then one of her colleagues contacted her, and they to become friends on Facebook, and then started interacting with her using Messenger. And the participant explains that she really wanted to answer in Norwegian, so she used Google Translate to be able to answer in Norwegian to this colleague. This way, social media became an important channel for engaging in the social interaction that is crucial for both communal inclusion and language learning. And we see also from other participants that the social aspects are important in the digital work interaction after work hours. Participants use SMS messages with clients and superiors and make contact on Facebook. And this quote from Greta, when Norwegians are Facebook friends, you can get more involved. So she uses the word involved to talk about how she was invited to buy and sales group, how she was being invited to groups where activities for children were organized, so she could be more involved in what was going on. We will stay with Greta a little bit longer because she's a participant in both sub-projects. So she was also interviewed about her school interaction. So we see two mediagrams here, one by Hilde Thyness and the other from the workplace project. And in a recent article from a special issue edited by Florian Busch and colleagues, we compare these two contexts. What is relevant for this talk is how both media choice and modality choice were considered as very important for the participants in both domains. So the written mode was often preferred to be able to take the time to write correctly, to translate, use tools, and take the time. And they also appreciated the possibility to use emoji and pictures, and they also use punctuation in this interaction. So the affordance of using visuals in their interaction was important, and we also have some examples of that. This is from the article. It's a message sent by a mother to the teacher in the evening with 2 pictures of very dirty clothes, and she's a bit upset about the child coming home with dirty clothes every day. So she chose SMS to be able to send this picture to really show the teacher how dirty the clothes were. And as you can see, she also uses a lot of emoji here. And throughout this interaction, which is analyzed in the article, they end up with this last message in green here. Yes, thank you. Hope we find the right path together, with some more positive emoji here. So through the interaction, the parent feels that her son and their concerns are really taken seriously by the teacher, and she ends up with this very positive, hopeful note. So the written mode, the pictures and the emoji were important for this to take place. We find also examples of this in the workplace interaction, where photos are used to explain complex issues, as the first quote here by the farm worker expresses. If you're in the field and there's an accident or something, you just take a picture and send it. It's easier to understand. So I don't know if this picture here tells you anything, but for the receiver, it was very easy. Yes, I can do it this afternoon, he answers. So this is a message sent by the farm worker to the grass farmer. The second example is from the main employer of the farm worker, where you can see use of emoji. And she says that she uses emoji to create a better working environment. The farm worker doesn't have many colleagues, so she feels that she has the sort of the responsibility to create a good working environment, and using emoji in digital interaction is part of that. So we see that various parts of the mediational repertoire are important to create practices of inclusion in the workplace and in parent-teacher interaction. Thyness found that interaction between parents and teacher was monolingual, usually only in Norwegian, so that the rest of the parents' repertoires remained invisible to the teachers. Thyness therefore wanted to test if mediagrams could also be used in the classroom and with parents to enhance teachers' critical multilingual awareness. The pupils worked on their mediagram at school and then brought it back to the parents when they went home to fill in the parents' practices and bring it back to school again. So this is a different way of using mediagrams, not for data collection and analysis, but as an activity in the classroom. We have seen that mediagrams serve as a methodology that takes the consequences of the recognition that the digital has ceased to be a salient or disruptive element in society. As a collaborative tool, mediagrams are used by participants to present themselves, for instance, to construct a specific identity in the data collection process, like Greta, who presented her life trajectory to show how she has been fighting her way to her own company, and Laura, who presented her situation as not a result of labor migration, but of lifestyle migration. We saw in the hotel case that mediagrams can be used to detect inequalities in interaction that may be closely related to inequalities at work as such, and how these inequalities may relate to differences in the perceived affordances of communication at work. Now, while the mediagram research process does pay attention to the increasingly blurred borders between online and offline communication through the interviews, offline interaction is not visualized in the graph. Could that be a possible development, or would it make this simple graph too complex to be useful? That's the question. Mediagrams make up a visual tool that renders complex practices of digital communication in a quite simple way. Just like Ina says about his MMS communication, there you have a picture and it can explain something complex. And these studies also show that mediagrams are not only useful to study multilingual family practices, but can also be used to study language practices in other domains. I will finish my talk with this happy and positive message, or these two happy and positive messages. The first is from a preschool assistant to the saying happy birthday to the preschool principal, and the principal answers with happy emojis and in local dialect. Thank you very much for your attention.